Are we all sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Then let's begin.
It's nice to sit down, isn't it?
It is.
It's been a long day. Hi, I'm Simon. I'm the lead of the Selenium Project. You may have heard of it.
Hi, I'm Jim. I work on the Selenium Project.
We were going to do a State of the Union, but we're told that a fireside chat is all the rage these days. That is not the apple juice I thought it was.
And thank God for that.
We're both on Twitter. You can find us. There are our handles up there. There's some bad news.
Wait, no singing? Hang on. Wait a minute. There will be a karaoke meetup later tonight. Where? It will be at Brando's Speakeasy sometime later this evening. That's where I'm going to go. If y'all want to show up, that'd be wonderful.
Jim is actually a proper rock star. You know, on the slide before it said, like, Jim the Rockstar Evans? You can go to iTunes, you can listen to his music.
True story.
You know when people say, like, I want a rock star developer? They get Jim.
But I'm not a rock star developer, just an actual rock star.
Who is a developer?
Who happens to be a developer.
I'm not a ninja developer.
Okay.
So, you know what? The world is made out of stories, right? Like, you can't spend 10 minutes with another person without telling some story about something. It may be about how awful your Selenium tests are and how they keep on failing and things like that. Or it could be like what you did last night or the time where, you know, Jim rocked out the karaoke bar for no readily apparent reason other than the fact that he is a rock star. So, you know, the world is made out of stories. And so we thought it would be nice to share some stories with you about what's been and what will come.
Yeah, and it turns out that people are hungry for stories. As the quote, this is Studs Terkel, who is a native Chicagoan and a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, He passed away a few decades ago, but the quote is that people are hungry for stories. It's part of our very being. And storytelling is a form of history and of immortality. And it goes from one generation to another. And I think that's really quite relevant when it comes to, particularly when it comes to talking about the Selenium Project.
So, yeah, we're gonna tell you a story. We're going to tell you several stories over the course of today, and we're going to begin with the story of the Internet Explorer driver. Does anyone remember Internet Explorer? It's a set of COM components dressed up as a web browser. Like 5 dogs in a trench coat pretending to be a human. And it was the very first version of WebDriver that actually drove a real web browser. And it began, and a friend at ThoughtWorks taught me that in C# you could call COM components and help me wire up that first version. And I was like, this is amazing. But I am a Java nerd, and I needed to call it from Java. And so it was like, well, I tell you what, I'll quickly rewrite this in C++. Now, the last time I'd done C++ was at university, and so it was like my first C++. A friend of mine at Google reviewed the code, and at the end of it, he asked me 2 questions. He goes, how does this even work? And why did you write this? He also told me he learned more about C++ reviewing that code than he thought he would. It appeared to work entirely by coincidence. And one of the wonderful things was it would periodically crash the entire JVM, so your tests may pass, but you would never know because you just have a core dump. It was wonderful. And I made absolutely no bones about the fact that I'd written idiot code. And Jim came along one day And as I recall, he goes, "I'm no C++ developer." He didn't then look at me and say, "You're not either." He said, "I'm no C++ developer, but I've had a go at cleaning it up." And it went from being absolute garbage to being actually quite nice to have a read of. It was pleasant. And from that moment on, I ran away from the IE driver in C++, and I've never looked back. So for me, the IE driver is done approximately 5 years ago. Jim is still working on it, inexplicably. I don't know why. There's nothing left to do, is there?
See, you naive man. So, the way I remember it, when I first came to start working on the Selenium project, the .NET bindings did not really exist, or they were not finished. And so I was a C# developer at the time, or C# programmer, and decided that I would take it on myself to finish those up for the .NET bindings for something else that I was planning on doing. However, when I started to run the test suite in the .NET bindings, I would notice that it would run against the Firefox driver just fine, but when it would run against the Internet Explorer driver, it would start out fine, and then eventually it would get slower and slower and slower. And so I said to myself, there must be something going on here. And I had not looked at C++ in quite some time at that point, but I finally figured out how to get Visual Studio to debug into the IE driver, which of course was C++, and noticed that there was it looked to me like there was a bug where there was a buffer getting allocated that was never getting freed. Now, of course, you have to remember that at this time, even then, my good friend Simon here was already a name. He was working at Google at the time, and here I was thinking that, gosh, I'm just this guy. I don't know if this is actually the problem, but maybe it is. So I contacted Simon, and I was very timid about it. I was like, hey, you know, I don't know if this is actually what's going on, but I think maybe in this place, this may be where the bug is. And Simon says to me, he looks at it and he says, that looks about right. And so we fixed it, and that was my first real contribution to the IE driver. Going forward, fast forward a couple of months, and Vista came out, and the IE driver couldn't be used without you having to elevate your permissions with universal access control, and that was a non-starter for me. So I said to myself, how are you going to get around this elevation problem? And I looked into it, and there was really no way that I could see to get it done without rewriting the driver, which I then decided, well, I suppose I must try to do that. And the rest, as they say, is history.
This is my puppy.
No.
Matilda Virginia Woolf. Named after one of the best Roald Dahl books, and a bad pun. So, stories are like a mechanism for us for making sense of the world, right? Like for me, the story was how I managed to escape from the confines of C++ and the IE driver to the relative freedom of, I don't know, the page factory. For Jim, it's a story about him joining the project and beginning to contribute and the sort of first steps on that particular path, right? And for both of us, those stories make sense, but for both of us, those stories are slightly different. But there are other stories that we use to sort of tell what's happening in the world of Selenium. Part of it is what happened at TPAC.
Yes, so long about 2012?
6 years ago.
Six years ago. We got the idea that it would really be a great thing if browser vendors owned the drivers for their own browser. And that was started by Opera as a concept, Opera software, followed by Chrome Driver a little later on. And we decided to try to figure out how could we encourage other browser vendors to do so. And we thought, wow, you know, there's this standards body called the Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. And all of the browser vendors are maybe not obligated, but there is immense pressure for each of them to implement the specs that are defined by the W3C. So if we could manage to get WebDriver created as a W3C standard, that would increase the chances vastly that browser vendors would create implementations, that is, drivers for their own browsers.
At the time, I was a W3C rep for Facebook, and I would talk to various people and from various browser vendors who weren't Mozilla. And they would tell me, like, it would be really useful if you actually put this thing forward for a standard body. It wasn't just us having a sort of brainwave and foisting something onto the world. It was like they were trying to figure out a way of contributing and taking part in what we were doing. And
so this many years later, we have a W3C specification for WebDriver.
6 years.
6 years. Yes, yes. And the specification is at the final stage of what a specification is in the W3C, called a recommendation, which means that it is done and is implementable. And in fact, all of the major desktop vendors have, desktop browser vendors have an implementation of WebDriver in some state or another. In fact, and all of them are publicly available at this point. So the driver for Edge, for Microsoft Edge, is created and maintained by Microsoft. And the current version that is available now, and by now I mean as of the October 2018 update of Windows 10, which just recently went generally available, the driver is included in the operating system itself, and it conforms to the W3C specification. Likewise, the driver for Safari 12, which is supplied and maintained by Apple. Safari 12 just recently shipped in September. And the driver for Safari 12, by default, also uses the protocol defined by the W3C specification. So Gecko driver, of course, has always supported it. The Internet Explorer driver has always supported it. The Chrome driver, created by the Chromium team and maintained by them, mostly by folks who work at Google, is lagging a little behind in spec compliance. It's mostly there, but it is missing one large piece of functionality. There is a bug in their bug tracker that indicates that they are working on that feature, intend to work on that feature in the fourth quarter of 2018, which we're in now. So hopefully, by the end of the year, we will have all of the major desktop browser vendors with driver implementations that, by default, use the W3C WebDriver specification dialect of the wire protocol, which is pretty amazing when you start to think about it.
So this is a photo of the working group from the W3C, of all of us sitting together. And I think it was Andreas, who used to work at Opera, is now at Mozilla, and has done an awful lot to help the Selenium project along. He said he had two friends, one who picked the best restaurants, and that friend is sitting in the dapper suit, Wilhelm, next to the chap in the red shirt, and a friend who picked the worst restaurants. And that's me, and that's why we're eating dirty hamburgers sitting outside on the pavement in Covent Garden in London, because I was allowed to pick the restaurant. And I think that's why John looks particularly unimpressed in this photograph. But they were really good burgers.
They were good burgers, I must say.
So, yeah, stories are also like that. An example of how stories bind us as a community. They bring us together. They're the shared experiences that we're able to communicate and experience. Patty's giving me advice. I always listen to Patty's advice, by the way. It's great.
Shared meaning.
Shared meaning. Shared meaning.
The foundation for any culture to develop and expand.
There we go. Shared meaning is the foundation for any culture to develop and expand. I wish I was that eloquent. It would be really nice.
I wish I was that eloquent.
So, the community grew recently. Does anyone remember Selenium IDE from back in the day? Yes! Shinya Kazatani wrote the first version. It was basically taking Selenium core, wrapping it up in a Firefox extension and shipping it. And it worked beautifully, right? And then Shinya disappeared from the project. He went on to have a life. And it ended up being maintained by Adam Goucher, who is here today somewhere. He's lurking down there, reading his phone. We're talking about you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Who then passed it to Samit Badel, who was super, super swamped. And that was kind of unfortunate because Mozilla, a while ago, dropped support for the XPI extensions that we were using and replaced it to web extensions, which was technically a really good idea for them, but was an absolutely terrible idea for us because the Selenium project is maintained by a handful of people, none of whom had the energy or capacity to fix the IDE and make it better. But all hope was not lost. The SideX project had taken the original Selenium IDE and they'd worked on it and they'd turned it into a web extension and they got it working and that was kind of cool. And then I was having a chat with the lovely people from Applitools and they were trying to figure out like a really good way of contributing to open source and to the Selenium project in particular. And they were talking about this Applitools Eyes program that they had and wondering if there was some sort of Selenium IDE that they could hook it into. And it's like, oh, it's funny you should mention that. And so what happened was they very generously donated engineering time and effort. And they helped rebuild Selenium IDE. So they were really conscious of like the fact that there was a large user base of people who were using this. And so the UI looks basically the same, but it is a ground-up rewrite of everything that was there. And it's an amazing piece of code. And the nice thing is it's a web extension, so it works not only in Firefox, but also Chrome. And theoretically, if you file enough bugs in all the browsers, all the browsers that support web extensions, which is basically all of them. So you can record a test like you used to, but one of the things it ships with now is a little runner, a JavaScript runner that you can take the saved files and you can run it. And if you do, you get something that looks a little bit like this, not the annihilation of the planet Earth by comets, which seems a bit dramatic. But you can see the new test runner. It's kicking off the various browsers there. This looks like Chrome. There we go, the little green bar. It's all the things you expect from a test runner, right? You can run tests in parallel. You can run them across different browsers. You can configure the capabilities. So you can record in multiple different browsers, and you can also run those recorded tests in multiple different browsers as well, which is a really nice feature. And obviously that was something you used to be able to do with the old Selenium IDE. And we're very conscious of the fact that, you know, it's nice to maintain those things, isn't it? So there's a callback to the sort of origins of the project and the stories there. Just let it finish running. There we go. I wouldn't have picked that background myself. Who knows? But there are stories that we have yet to write.
Indeed.
And things to do as we move forward. So, Jim.
Well, for one thing, we're looking at rewriting the Selenium documentation. We have new documentation that needs to be written, and to be honest, that's a great place if you're looking for a place to contribute and a way to contribute to the project. Contributing to the documentation is a great way to get involved. There are some open source projects where documentation is not seen sort of as a first-class citizen in terms of contributions. We don't feel that way in the Selenium Project at all. We recognize, yeah, absolutely. We recognize that the first place that a lot of people turn is to the documentation. However, I also recognize that from my own limitations, I'm not a great documentation writer. It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not my strength. And there always seems to be something more fun for me to do than writing documentation, though there are lots of people who love writing documentation. And if you're one of those people who really loves contributing to a community by writing documentation, we want you to please come and help us out with that.
The nice thing is we've been doing this call at SeleniumConf for a few years now, and it's working. Like, we are getting documentation pull requests, which is fantastic, and so that stuff is moving forward quite nicely.
Additionally, we have some new branding, some new, the old Selenium logo and color scheme has been around for a very long time, and it seems to be a little dated. Simon, maybe you can talk a little bit about what our new branding is like and...
Well, I mean, you can see it.
Indeed.
Jason Huggins, who's sitting here, can you remember who came up with the original TIC logo? No, because it's so far in the past, right?
It is a human being, and they need to get credit and be named, and so we need to fix that somewhere on the internet. We'll
right.
Put it out there.
So
we'll tweet it out later.
Yeah.
It's awesome, and we need to give them credit.
So the origin story of the TIC logo is lost. We need to dig it out.
Disappeared through the sands of time.
But it is.
But you should get credit, whoever you are watching this right now.
Yep.
Yes,
yep.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing thing because everyone recognizes that tick. And so what we wanted to do, we wanted to keep like that recognizable tick. You'll notice that each of the projects has a color associated with it, and we used those colors with the branding of the conferences and the tooling and the websites and stuff like that. But it's just looking a bit more modern. So rather than looking like it was designed in the early 2000s, it now looks like it was designed in the mid 2000s.
And concurrent with some of that new branding, we want to include that in a new home site for Selenium. The URL will be the same, but of course the look we want to modernize the look and make it look like it was written in the mid 2000s.
Has anyone been to the SeleniumHQ.org website recently? Did you get the feeling like the 90s were calling and they really wanted their website back? And the thing is written with JSPs, for heaven's sake. It's using decently antiquated technology.
And we could really use a hand with putting all of that together too. So if that's something that you feel like you could contribute to, please, 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 let us know.
So stories are also a way of shaping the future. When you're a small child, you tell your parents exactly what they're going to get you for Christmas by suggesting that Santa might bring you, I don't know, that robot with the buttons on the top that will walk forward and then turn right and then carry moving forward. The Amtrak, I think it was called. Or whatever it is, right? Like you sit there and you think like, yeah, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. I mentioned Christmas with good reason. Because years ago, I think it was in the Boston SeleniumConf.
It was.
I stood on stage and I confidently announced that we were going to release Selenium 3 by Christmas. Christmas came.
Notice that he didn't say what year Christmas was going to be.
We're an open source project, so we're sort of fairly lax about timelines and stuff like that. Some 2 years later, nowhere near Christmas, we finally shipped Selenium 3. Oops. So I'm never going to say we're going to ship a version of Selenium by Christmas. Instead, we're going to ship Selenium 4 by Chinese New Year. You will notice that we have all the animals up there. We have learned from our lesson.
We have indeed. Well, after a fashion.
After a fashion. I mean, we're clearly we're not very good at learning the lesson, because 12 years after starting this project, we're still hacking code on it. You'd think we'd have finished it by now.
One would think.
So yeah, we're not quite sure which animal it will be, but we're aiming for Chinese New Year for Selenium 4. What on earth is going to be in Selenium 4? Like, one of the big features is going to be a new Selenium grid. The original Selenium grid was written by a Frenchman. The second Selenium grid was written by a Frenchman, just coincidentally. And the third one was not written by a Frenchman. The one that's going to be in Selenium 4 is more of a collaborative effort. I've put the skeleton of it in place, but lots of the very talented people who have experience with very large Selenium grids are looking at that code, shaking their heads in dismay, and I'm sure they're going to make it better. One of the key things that we really want is to take advantage of the modern world. Like, Selenium Grid was written when a rack of machines was super expensive, and if you had a grid with sort of 15 nodes on it, you had a massive grid. Google's one was like 150 computers. It's like 150, that's an unconscionable number. Nowadays, Source Labs are running 2 million tests a day. Grids get big, and so we want to take advantage of modern infrastructure like Docker, Kubernetes, AWS, GCP, all those buzzwords that make the DevOps people happy and very excited. But the problem is, when you have a distributed system, it becomes really hard to tell what has happened when it starts breaking down. And so we're kind of embracing this concept of observability, which is sort of to do with introspection into the system to allow you to figure out when a failure happens, why did it happen and where did it come from? So it's a combination of monitoring and alerting and tracing and other exciting things. I shipped the code. There's a hackathon after this, actually, isn't there? To try and introduce some of the ideas. So if you were interested in distributed tracing and stuff like that, come to that hackathon.
I will say that the skeleton of the new implementation is currently checked into the project, and Alexei Barentsev, who is another core developer on the project, was able to fire it up the other day, and the direct quote that he used was, "Holy world, it works!" So we at least have a bare bones working implementation in place now.
Yep. So hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, the next release of Selenium 3 should be one of the last ones, maybe the last one, and then we'll start on the 4 alphas for as long as it takes. If it doesn't, we're going to start just incrementing through the digits of pi, since we're on 3.14 at the moment, and that's what happens when you give a man with a poor sense of humor control of the numbering scheme.
But you know, the Selenium project isn't just about technology. There's a lot of different moving pieces to the Selenium project. I mentioned, of course, documentation, our own presence on the web, but there are the thing about the Selenium project that really sets it apart from a lot of other communities that I have been a part of is the people that we are able to work with on a daily basis. I'd like to call out some folks who have been instrumental in our ability to grow this community, and Ashley, Marcus, Andrew, and Manoj. You probably know at least a few of them. Ashley, of course, introduced us. Ashley Huntsberger, Marcus Merrill, Andrew Krug, who he's around here somewhere.
He's hiding.
He's hiding. And Manoj. Their commitment to increasing the diversity of our project is admirable and is absolutely amazing. They have helped us to not just be a bunch of old boring white guys sitting around doing Selenium stuff, and I think that's fantastic. It's a great thing. And
it's still boring.
Well, but it's not just old white guys being boring.
Yeah, it's not just old white guys.
Additionally, though these 4 people in particular are absolutely instrumental in helping to make this conference come together. And without them, it would not be happening. And they certainly deserve a round of applause, I think, for all their hard work. Additionally, we also have a program for people attending this conference which is a scholarship program. A lot of people who may not be able to afford to attend the conference, I'm not going to point them out and ask them to stand up or anything, but recognize that our commitment to diversity is such that we are willing to help people come and be part of this community, and we extend that belief even to putting our money where our mouths are.
Yeah, I mean, for many years as well, what we used to do is, and we still do, we try and take the project, or take the conference, to where there's a large user community who haven't had an opportunity to see Selenium yet. Now, sometimes timing constraints and things like that mean we have to revisit places we've been before, because we can do those things quickly. But bringing the project and bringing the conference to audiences who use the project but can't really afford to travel very far is something that we believe is really important, and is something that we have done repeatedly through the lifetime of the conference. So, you know, stories have themes, right? Like, if you're an avid reader of books, I bet there's a kind of genre of book you like. It might be science fiction, or romantic novels, or comedies, or the collected works of Isaac Asimov, or something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's good, isn't he?
Oh, amazing.
He's dead.
I cried when he died.
You can read everything that he's done now.
I know.
It's not like Game of Thrones, which is this ongoing grind.
Indeed.
Or The Wheel of Time, which is inexplicably carried on going after Robert Jordan died.
Indeed.
I was really looking forward to reading it.
But we digress.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, we digress. There are themes to stories, right? And in the Selenium Project, like, the themes that we think are really important are to do with empathy and friendship and support. Like, you know, until Jim, I never knew Jim before he started contributing code to the project, and when I got married the other year, Jim was one of the people that I invited to the wedding. Like, I've made friends in this project, and genuine friends, good friends. Empathy is what drove the original design of the APIs. The WebDriver API was like, well, we know that the people who use this aren't necessarily the greatest developers on the planet. They haven't had time to build that experience. And so if we have an API that leads them in the right direction, then maybe, just maybe, we can help them make their job less miserable. We never thought it was going to make anyone's job good. The best we could ever hope for is it sucks less. Sort of like the broken Hoover of APIs, yes. Right? That's what we were looking for.
And, you know, our philosophy has always tried to be, from a technical standpoint, to try to approach things as best we can the way a user would. The way we interact with the browser is as close to the way a user would interact with the browser, which we think has advantages over other approaches, in that the software that's being browsed, or the websites that are being browsed, act more naturally and react more naturally in that. But of course, the project has been around for a while, and over the times that we've been together as a project, we've developed certain traditions, yep. And that's part of having support and a community of support and friendship and empathy. Like, for example, there's a Selenium IRC channel which has a bot that does helpful commands, and one of the helpful commands that it has is "Who broke it?" And the answer to "Who broke it?" is Simon Stewart.
Always.
Always. It doesn't matter what the last commit was. It's that Simon Stewart broke it.
The most upsetting thing is it's normally right.
It's true. But we all genuinely enjoy spending time with each other. All of us who are committers on the project, we genuinely like being in each other's company. And we have a lot of jokes. We have a lot of fun. We joke around a lot. But it's not always just about joking around. It's also about support. I can recall times having been in the hospital when you know, messages of support come in from these people, my friends, you know, from all over the world, have been amazingly helpful and supportive. Times I haven't felt my best, and I'll get a note from Simon that says, "Do you need a hug?" Which is amazing, because I never turn down hugs, or very rarely do.
Hugs are great.
Hugs are fantastic. And Hugs is fantastic, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we've had people show up on that IRC channel, which is mirrored to Slack. If you're like not a grumpy old man who likes plain text. If you prefer to have your CPU maxed out, your RAM maxed out, and a lovely, pretty proprietary interface, then you can also get it on Slack. But we've had people show up and they've gone, I've been told that I need to do this and I don't know what to do and I don't know how to pick a programming language and I really need help. And that has been the place where people have guided them through the process of picking the right language, talking to people, learning how to program, and they've gone from, I don't know how to do this thing that I've been told I have to do, to actually being capable and writing decent code. And I thought that was amazing. And the last time someone came to that channel, the person who helped them out was the first person who'd come to the channel and said, I don't know what I'm doing. And there was that lovely sort of virtuous circle, and it was beautiful. You can all read, right? Do you know the song "Everyone's Free to Wear Sunscreen" by Baz Luhrmann?
Yes.
Be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. That wasn't actually Baz Luhrmann who said it, and the reason why we include it is because it's from the Chicago Tribune. Mary Schmitz, I can't read the name, sorry, is the person who wrote it. And she wrote it as a sort of proposed commencement address. And it was lovely, and we've been trying to sort of keep the conference local, right? So all the quotes are from local people. But that seemed particularly apt, because we're now going to go delving deep into some nostalgia. Like, why was WebDriver necessary in the first place? Like, Selenium RC existed, and it was a piece of technology that worked. And the problem was that even then, we knew that it was sitting inside the JavaScript sandbox, right? And we knew that at some point, that sandbox was going to be a cage that we had to get out of, but were trapped inside. And we knew this because websites were becoming more and more and more sophisticated. Like, you had to get out of that sandbox somehow. The other reason is because I'm a snob and I didn't like the API. That's beside the case. But the technology reason was the main reason. And, you know, I was young and stupid, and so I thought, this will be easy. And I wrote, you know, the IE driver, which was awful. And I wrote the Firefox driver, which, when I demoed it at GTAC, failed to work. And so I did a demo where I telnetted into Firefox and made it do things. And I think Jason really enjoyed that, because he was there at that conference too. And I distinctly remember Paul Hammond, who was one of the sort of leading lights of the Selenium community, turning around to me and calling me an absolute idiot for doing this, because it was way too much hard work. He was right. It was way too much hard work, and that's why we had to do it. But this sort of recurring theme of like, we can do everything in JavaScript still comes up to this day, right? Everyone realizes that the DOM web element has a click method, and they go, I can automate my testing, and Selenium sucks, right? Because my tests are wildly unstable. Because, you know, an end-to-end test needs everything working. They think that if they somehow wrote their test in JavaScript, then all their infrastructure would be rock solid. I don't understand it, but that's what they think. And so the timeline of the bad idea begins with, well, I'm going to do an element click, and then they realize the events don't work, and so they do, like, you know, document.fire event, and then sort of 3 weeks later, they're writing a sort of man-in-the-middle SSL breaking proxy so they can try and inject JavaScript into random pages that pass their way, and nobody is happy. Except for the person doing it, because it's a lot of fun to write that code, right? It's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
Jason, when did you started working on Selenium 13 years ago?
Spring of 2004.
Spring of 2004 is where the original Selenium code came from. 14 years ago. It was the time and expenses app at ThoughtWorks. And ThoughtWorkers are a contrarian bunch, so when they're told that they have to use one particular browser to file their expenses, what do? They use a completely different browser. And so when you fix the bugs that they report in that different browser, you break it in this first one. And then when you fix the bugs in both of them, the one person in the world who was using Opera would go, well, it's broken here. And so you'd end up with this sort of vicious cycle. And then the person using Conqueror inexplicably would go like, well, you know, when I finally connect to a wired network and I make this work. It was awful, right? It was, you know. And so it was a really good idea to do that. But that was a long time ago, and things have improved a heck of a lot. And I'm really glad that the browser vendors are now doing that. Because it's
Better them than me.
better than
Wait,
me.
hang on. I'm doing IE, so.
Sucker. But, you know, if you take a look at it, Jim has been working on this for
Almost 9 years.
almost 9 years. I started in 2006. You know, the original code. The original release was in 2007. That's like 11 or 12 years of hacking away on something. If we were a company, it would be incredibly unusual to have people who had remained working on a project for that long still be involved and not be running away. And I think it's a testament to the sort of strength of community and how good things are in terms of the level of support we get, that we've been able to do that. However, you know, we can't carry on like this for forever. Like, the things that we needed at the beginning were technical vision and the ability to mesh together all the browser vendors and have those discussions and, you know, the original empathy for the design, but we don't need those skills in the same way anymore. The browser vendors, as we've pointed out repeatedly, are the ones who are developing the browser implementations. They need the technical nous. We are building out Selenium Grid, and that next version is going to require not just the technical skills of building Grid, but, you know, somebody who's familiar with distributed systems and stuff like that. The documentation needs someone who's going to be really strong on, you know, fostering that kind of stuff. The next version of Selenium that comes along is going to need to do fit and finish. Like, who finds it easy to figure out the correct locator? There are so many talks at this conference about finding the perfect locator, with, you know, Jason Arbon saying you should use TensorFlow and, you know, the small power of the sun to find a button to click on. And people trying to figure out how to wedge blockchain in there inexplicably. I don't know. So my plan is to make a bit of space to allow, like, the next generation of leaders to come up through the project. And so what I'm planning on doing is shipping Selenium 4 at Chinese New Year when we finally get there, and then stepping back, and we'll do a rotating leadership of the project, and we will find people who are coming up through the ranks, who have the skills that we need and the desires to lead the project, and the vision to take it somewhere nice and interesting and good and different from the place where we've been pointing for like 12 years. Because it's time for the Selenium project to enter, like, the next phase of its life cycle. And I'm definitely still going to be involved, but I won't be the man who has their hands on the wheel after we ship Selenium 4.0.
Indeed. A quick word about the Software Freedom Conservancy. The Software Freedom Conservancy is the entity, the legal entity that administers the copyright to all of the code that forms Selenium. It's a 501(c)(3) non-for-profit corporation in the United States. They provide us with a lot of great services, like legal services for defending our copyrights and trademarks, for making sure that we are in compliance with all the different laws that need to be handled. They also provide us with financial services to manage contributions and the budget, and we love the Software Freedom Conservancy, the SFC. If you would like to make a donation to the Selenium Project monetarily, you can do so through the SFC. And their website is conservancy.org.
Yes, and they are great.
And they are fantastic people. They are amazing.
And Karen, who's one of their directors, is a cyborg.
She is. She is indeed.
Yep.
So since we've been around for quite some time, it's natural to ask, you know, is the Selenium project done? Are we at a place where we're done?
Yeah, we must be. The
Well,
browser vendors now do everything for us.
So I'm reminded of a story of Benjamin Franklin. It's one of my favorite stories. As at the end of the Constitutional Convention in 1789, when the members were about to sign, who were signing the U.S. Constitution, Dr. Franklin remarked next to some of the people around him that in the past, painters had often found it difficult in their art to distinguish between a rising and a setting sun. And there happened to be on the chair behind the president of the convention a picture of a sun. And the quote that he says, and as James Madison related the quote, he says, Benjamin Franklin said, "I have often and often in the course of the session and the vicissitudes of my hopes and fears as to its issue, looked at that behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun." And I think that when it comes to Selenium, I think it's great to think that we're really kind of just getting started and the sun is very much still rising on our project.
There will be new stories to tell. Some of you in this audience are going to be the ones that tell those stories, that contribute to them, that fashion them, that use those stories to shape a future that hasn't yet happened yet, but which you will step and guide that project along. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun while I've been working on it. Jim has...
I've had a great deal of fun as well.
He tells me he's had a lot of fun on it as well. You know, and it's been a hell of a ride. But the nice thing is, there are still stories to tell, and this could be the sign you're looking for. You should come, be part of the story. The Fix a Bug Become a Committer workshop. We actually fixed a bug, and we actually committed it. There are people here who now know how to build the Selenium code that weren't there, and they understand how all the pieces fit together. There was the Wonder Woman workshop, which taught people about empathy and the skills they need for dealing with people and with life. There was, you know, getting started with Selenium, breeding new experts and helping you become fantastic and amazing. And then there was the Grid workshop, which is sort of where you go when you, tests don't run in your local machine, but you're not quite ready to go and do everything in the cloud, or you need to do it yourself. So hopefully this conference has been about giving you the skills and the abilities you need to think about how you can become part of the story.
So come be part of the story. Join us. Have fun. And I hope as you've enjoyed the first day that you'll continue to enjoy the remainder of the conference. Thanks for coming and thanks for listening to us.
Thank you very much, everybody.